For 30 years, I was the invisible wife, until the night my husband stood in the spotlight and declared his love for another woman. That's when I decided his perfect life would come crashing down. Samuel and I had been married for 30 years, but we had never made it public. We had decided that on the opening night of his most recent play, Falling Leaves, we would finally tell the world that we had been husband and wife for 30 years. That evening, I intended to get to the theater in time to see the moment firsthand, but the traffic was terrible. He concealed our 30-year marriage and then publicly confessed his love to a mistress, but I quickly made him regret it. Sitting in the back of a taxi, I watched the minutes go by, feeling more anxious every second. Then, as I was distractedly looking through my phone, I saw a headline that said Samuel had made a big announcement to the local news, but it wasn't about our marriage exposure but rather about his first love returning, that woman, Autumn, back in college. After graduation, they pursued careers in theater, enjoying some success together, but she left for Europe and, as far as anyone knew, never came back. However, she did show up on the first night of Samuel's play, Falling Leaves, carrying a bouquet of fresh flowers, walking directly to the edge of the stage, and giving them to him. Samuel stood beneath the spotlight, looking at her with a look of unmistakable tenderness in his eyes, and the audience erupted in applause. For 30 years, I had stood in Samuel's shadow, giving up my career to devote myself to him, and I had changed from a young woman to someone with silver strands. Some were even moved to tears, calling it a love that had lasted for decades. I sat in the back of a taxi, watching the rain streak down the window, wondering if I should still go to the theater or ruin what seemed to be a perfect reunion. 2 months ago, Samuel told me, "Amelia, I think it's time to make our marriage public." When the play premiered, I was astonished and overjoyed, even though I meticulously removed the blue dress he had given me when we got engaged, pressing out every crease and making all the necessary adjustments. In her hair, years of exhaustion had taken their toll on my body. In order to finally devote myself fully to this long-awaited night, the housework was completed and our son was sent to Germany. However, as I hurried through the rain with an umbrella in hand, Samuel's assistant answered the phone and said, "Hurry, Amelia, if you haven't arrived yet, don't bother coming. Samuel's got something urgent to deal with." When I stopped in my tracks, I didn't have much time to explain, so farewell. The line went dead. I stood, my fingers were frozen, tightening around the bouquet I had brought for Samuel, when a notification appeared on my screen and said, "Local theater star Samuel reunites with his first love after 40 years. It was a heartwarming moment, and when I clicked on the news, I saw a video of Samuel standing in the spotlight, radiant, holding the flowers Autumn had given him. His eyes never left her, as if the world had vanished, leaving just the two of them. The comments were full of praise. Now, 40 years later, this is love, and she is still the only one he sees. It's more romantic than the movies, and I stood on a chilly street corner, staring at the screen while silently crying. Falling Leaves Autumn was the last play I realized Samuel had picked for her, not for the audience or his career. If all he could have was a title that carried her name, then what was I? I was 440 years old, between the ages of 25 and 65, and I had dedicated my entire life to Samuel, leaving my medical career to devote myself fully to him for 30 years. What did I get? The rain trickled through my hair, clouding my vision. And I felt lightheaded. The bouquet fell from. Samuel and I were never meant to be together. He was a theater major and an aspiring actor, and I was a medical student. My hands landed on the wet pavement, and I stumbled into a small convenience store and collapsed into a chair, my body too exhausted to support me any further. I had worked my entire life, making sacrifices for my family and my child, but I had never once truly lived for myself. Why had I allowed myself to become this way? Samuel was a struggling young actor at the time, spending his days playing unnamed roles in community theater and his nights working as a part-time music instructor at the very night school I attended. That's how we met. It was the 1980s, back when there weren't many entertainment options. During the day, I wore a white coat and made rounds as a hospital intern. At night, I went to vocal classes at the local night school just for fun. He smiled. That winter, shivering in the cold, and said, "This is for your parents." He said, "The packaging is from an upscale French pottery tree, one that I knew wasn't cheap." Samuel had probably spent 2 days' wages on it. He didn't say much, just placed the cake on the table and went. He had a charming face that lit up like sunlight dancing on a lake. After we got married, I continued my medical career after a few arduous years of internship before I eventually became a full-fledged doctor. Samuel's theater career was also gaining traction, but we were still having financial difficulties, so he hesitated to spend money on a good suit because he couldn't afford an assistant. It took some time for my parents to change their opinion of him, but they saw him as sincere and reliable. I gave up my job at the hospital to work as his full-time assistant after much deliberation. I helped him learn lines, set up appointments, ironed his shirts, cooked his meals, and handled every aspect of his life so he could concentrate solely on pursuing his dream. One evening, as he sat at the dinner table looking at the dishes I had painstakingly prepared, his eyes turned red. He took my eye, smiled and shook my head, saying, "Hello, Amelia, you've done so much for me, I'll never be able to repay you." Marriage is about supporting one another, and during those 10 years, I heard Samuel's name linked to Autumn's more times than I could count. They had been college sweethearts before they broke up, but his fans never let the story fade. I'm the one he married, and Samuel isn't that kind of man. Even when I was in labor, clutching the hospital sheets in agony, he was away on tour, and when I saw him on stage, smiling at another woman with such tender eyes and so much emotion, I told him that his side only got more brilliant and the rumors about him never stopped, so I decided to believe in him. They're just co-stars, it's work. Samuel insisted on keeping our marriage a secret, but I'm at a pivotal point in my career. So Amelia, can't you understand? When the time is right, we'll make it public. Okay, he said so matter-of-factly, as if I were the unreasonable one. He told me everything about Autumn, swearing that their past was long behind them. He pulled me into his arms and whispered softly against, even though he was away most of the year and his name kept getting connected to other women, I told myself that it was all for our family that he was working so hard for, but now that I was older and my hair was turning gray, I finally saw it. I told him that I would take care of you for the rest of my life, trust me, and I believed him. The truth, I had spent my entire life believing in a man who was never mine. I don't remember how I got home that night, but I do remember that Samuel didn't call for 2 whole days without giving me any explanation or even a half-hearted, "Are you okay?" When he finally returned home on the 3rd day, he dragged his weary body through the door. I was sitting in the living room with the TV on, but I wasn't watching it normally. He truly lived in his own world, and every time he came home, I would get up early, go to the market, choose the freshest ingredients, and cook a full spread of food. I would greet him with a warm smile, ask if he wanted tea, and tell him dinner was ready. This time, though, I didn't move Samuel. Instead, he changed out of his clothes and walked over, his tone as gentle as ever. "What's for dinner?" "It smells amazing," I said softly. Home-cooked meals, but did my modest meals even register in his mind after years of eating steak and lobster at fancy restaurants? He would constantly say, "Wow, no one cooks better than you," but I knew that was just a habit. At one point, they made me happy for the entire day, but now I just find them funny. I looked up at the man I had stood beside for 30 years and asked slowly, "Sam, do you genuinely enjoy the food I prepare?" Samuel seemed taken aback, he hesitated, then he laughed and reached for my hand. "Why do you sound like a 20-year-old? Who is jealous?" I pulled my hand away before he could touch me. "Where did you go after the play's opening night?" His smile froze, and he relaxed his handcuffs. "Yes, I know I told you we'd go public that night, but you were late, so I had my assistant call and tell you not to come," he said in a purposefully casual tone. "I had urgent matters to take care of, so I didn't have time to explain that was my mistake. Let's not fight over this, okay?" If this had happened earlier, I would have given in and told myself that a marriage required patience and that I shouldn't hold it against him for the sake of our child, but this time I wasn't going to let it go, so I calmly repeated, "Where did you go?" After the play, Samuel finally turned to face me, his eyes flickering with annoyance. "Amelia, are you really checking up on me? We're not kids anymore, can you stop acting like this?" I laughed quietly, then took a look at this. I reached for the pile of pictures. I laid out the printed screenshots from last night's social media. Buzz on the table one by one. They showed Samuel leaving the stage and walking alongside Autumn to a nearby restaurant. They ordered Autumn's favorite red wine and had a wonderful dinner together. In one of the pictures, he was leaning in and kissing her on the cheek. I didn't yell, cry, or lose my temper, I just looked at him and told him again that we're not children anymore. Can you stop? As soon as Samuel's face darkened, he grabbed the pictures and began to flip through them. His expression twisted the polite mask he always wore, and he slammed the pictures back onto the table. Autumn and I were just catching up, and he pushed his chair back before storming out the door, leaving nothing but silence in his wake. I didn't understand. I didn't leave the house for the next few days, didn't check my phone, and Samuel didn't call, text, or even use the landline. Was he really upset, or did he just not care? It didn't matter anymore, so I sat by the window in the sunlight. Why is it that some people can do wrong and still be the ones who lash out in anger? For 30 years, I had been busy running the household, taking care of the children, and making Samuel's performance schedules. But now, for the first time in 30 years, I sat quietly and sewed a new apron for myself. Then, the phone rang, and I looked at the screen and saw Jack's name. My son hasn't called much since he moved to Germany to study, so too picked up the phone, a little taken aback when I saw his name appear. Hello, Mom, did you and Dad have a fight? He asked bluntly. And I furrowed my brow. Why do you ask? Dad hasn't been posting anything in the family chat these past few days. Normally, he takes a picture of everything, like when he buys coffee at the store, and shares it. However, for the past few I tried to keep my tone light and tell him that nothing was wrong and that he should concentrate on his studies, but Jack didn't buy it. His voice suddenly became sharper. Are you sure that nothing is going on? Dad called me and said that you've been cold with him lately. I fell silent. Mom. What are you really thinking? Jack went on. Jack's tone became impatient. This should be over. It's better for us all to be happy as a family than for you to keep throwing a fit. Autumn is just Dad's old friend. They bumped into each other. It's not a big deal. She even helped me before I left for Germany. Shek is a nice person. You can't keep doubting her. I gripped the phone tighter, my fingers turning white. I took a deep breath, and I spoke in a very calm voice, saying, Jack, your dad is a fool, but I never imagined you'd be one too. The line went silent as I slowly walked out onto the balcony and looked into the distance, where the sun was setting and casting a golden glow over the mountain shadows. It was so beautiful at first. I said, I'm done serving this family from this moment on, I'm living for myself. My voice was unwavering and more determined than ever before, and I didn't hesitate to hang up the phone. This was the first time I had ever allowed myself to be angry, and surprisingly, after saying those words, I felt an unexpected sense of relief that evening. I went to my surprise, Samuel returned home early that night. I lay in bed listening to the sound of him searching the kitchen for something, and before long, the bedroom door creaked open. For the past few days, Samuel and I had been in a silent standoff, neither of us willing to initiate contact. I assumed he would find another excuse to go out and return smelling of some perfume from a social gathering, acting as though nothing had happened. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly as I got up and walked to the kitchen, but what I saw there stopped me cold. The kitchen was a disaster, with water boiling over in the pot half. Samuel was standing in the doorway, his face covered in flour, his voice cautious. Amelia, I can't find the salt. Can you come help me look for it? Samuel smiled awkwardly and pushed a bowl toward me, saying, I haven't cooked in years. Do you want to try it? I stared at the clumpy noodles in the bowl, but I felt nothing inside because he wasn't lowering himself out of fear. Sliced onions were all over the cutting board, and the knife, which he had obviously struggled with, was a mess. I slowly pushed the bowl of noodles back toward him because he was afraid of losing me. He was worried that he would never find someone like me who could care for him for 30 years. He didn't have to worry about any household chores or remember where the salt was because he just needed to talk to me, and the food would be on the table, the clothes would be washed and ironed, and everything at home would run smoothly. His face froze as he looked up and said calmly, Sam, I don't want to eat this now, and I don't want to eat it ever again. Then, almost casually, I added, let's live separate lives from now on. Samuel stood there in shock for a long time before forcing a smile as if trying to soothe the child, and Amelia stopped making jokes, but Amelia, do you really think it's appropriate to say something like that? He froze, completely taken aback by my decisiveness, widening his eyes in disbelief as if he had heard the most outrageous thing. 30 years of love, and you don't even care you're going to make a fuss. I knew I wasn't kidding, I had had enough, so I didn't say anything else. I just looked at Samuel, my eyes firm and resolute. Considering that I didn't reply, Samuel's tone became even more severe. I hope you'll think carefully at your age, you need to, because he had kept our marriage a secret for 30 years, kept me in the dark for 30 years, and had no qualms about accepting flowers from his first love on stage. I smiled, not bothering to argue, and just turned around, went back to the bedroom, and made my decision. The following morning, I called Harper's number. He always played the age card, as if a woman was supposed to accept her fate once she reached a certain age, stop overanalyzing, and stay quietly at home, continuing to serve as his domestic assistant. Harper wasn't my biological daughter, she was an orphan I had sponsored following an earthquake in the early 2000s. She studied diligently, earned scholarships, and eventually made a life for herself by opening a small inn in Colorado and becoming her own boss. She was a good kid, intelligent and hardworking from the moment she picked up her voice. When she said, Mom, have you finally decided to come visit me? She called me Mom. She invited me to stay. I smiled and said, yes, I finally made up my mind. I booked a flight for tomorrow. That's amazing. Harper's excitement was evident, and I said, I'll pick you up from the airport myself after hanging up. I had been with her more times than I could count, but I always made excuses about having too many obligations at home. I began packing and going through my closet when I discovered a blue trench coat that I hadn't worn in years. I had purchased it for myself years ago when I was younger and was drawn to bright colors, but after marrying Samuel, he insisted that darker tones were more suitable for a married woman. Instead, I pushed the coat to the back of the closet and never took it out again. I ran my fingers over the fabric, which was still warm and soft, and I folded it neatly. I put it in my suitcase, but as soon as I closed it, the doorbell rang. I opened it, froze, and saw Autumn standing outside. She was as put together as ever, with a silk scarf around her neck, flawless makeup, and a tiny smile on her lips. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, and I didn't answer, so I moved aside to let her in. Samuel had left the house, which was quiet. Samuel's assistant mentioned that you two were planning to announce your marriage on opening night. She sighed in a voice laced with mock sympathy. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disrupt your plans." It was early for his rehearsals, and we were the only two of us facing each other in the living room. I poured her a cup of tea and waited, and Autumn lifted the cup, blowing gently on the surface. She put her teacup down with a gentle clink, and I kept a small smile on my lips and said nothing. If Samuel had told me about it last month, I wouldn't have come that night. It's such a coincidence, isn't it? My stomach dropped last month, so Samuel must have known she was coming all along. Hadn't told me that he would rather lie and make excuses to keep me away than just say no to her. That night, she stood in front of the audience and said, "These flowers should have been given away 20 years ago." I finally understood what she meant. For a long time, I thought Samuel had picked me out carefully, but now I realize that I had just been the right choice 40 years ago, Samuel and Autumn's convenient choice. Had a love that burned bright, but their constant arguments broke them up. Then I came along, and I was kind and understanding, never fought, never caused trouble, and I was willing to give up everything to be around him. He married me, but he had never really loved me, even when one of Samuel's friends got drunk at a dinner party years ago and casually remarked, "If Samuel and Autumn hadn't broken up, you two wouldn't fall." Leaned back with a satisfied smile on her lips, saying, "Don't blame Samuel, he's always had me in his heart." She lifted her cup and took a slow sip, saying, "You were just the right person, the one who happened to be there when he needed someone." Her words were as easy and light as she was. For decades, I gave Samuel everything I had, speaking calmly and steadily, not because I couldn't live without him but because I believed he was worth it. I met her gaze and smiled, but now I realize that he is nothing more than a weak, self-centered man. For a moment, I looked at my teeth and laughed quietly. Her expression finally cracked, and she opened her mouth as if to respond but hesitated instead, giving a tight, forced smile, grabbing her purse, and tilting my head slightly. Perhaps even annoyed, she hadn't expected me to be this composed. I added lightly, "I should really thank you, Autumn, for taking out the trap." As she left, I felt lighter than I had in years. This absurd farce was finally coming to an end, so I picked up my suitcase and exhaled deeply. It was time to leave. I left a signed divorce agreement on the entryway table, with no note, explanation, or farewell. If he wanted to sign it, just do so. I didn't care anymore. "It's only been a few years, but why do you look like you've aged so much?" I froze for a second, instinctively putting a hand to my hair as the glass window reflected my image back at me once thickly. Harper was waiting at the exit when I got off the plane, and as soon as she saw me, she broke into a run and gave me a tight hug. I smiled slightly bitterly, my dark hair now heavily streaked with silver. Harper seemed to realize that her words had been poorly chosen, and she quickly corrected herself, looping her arm through mine with a bright smile. "No, Mom, you're not old at all. You're just tired. Give it some time once you relax. You look younger than ever." I nodded, allowing her to continue to take my hand and guide me out of the airport. The golden hues of the setting sun extended through the glass windows, bathing us in a warm glow for a moment. The warmth in my palm made me feel confused, as though I had been transported back in time. A long time ago, Jack used to hold my hand in this manner as we walked home together. He had been such a loving and well-behaved child, and he had been very attached to me. However, when he reached adolescence, everything changed. He developed a video game obsession, which caused his grades to plummet, our conversations to become colder and shorter, and our distance from one another to grow. What did Samuel do? Every time I tried to correct him, he would simply laugh and dismiss it, saying that it's nothing major because he's just a kid and plays games, but he's totally ignoring his studies. I would be left shaking my head in helplessness, worrying about Jack's future alone because no one else seemed to care. But now that I didn't have to, Samuel would just shrug and say, "So what if he doesn't go the academic route? It's not like we can't afford to support him," and Jack would not agree. "Mom, you don't get me at all. Dad is the only one who understands." Harper was considerate enough to take time off to show me around. We stayed in a comfortable cabin tucked away in the Colorado mountains, wandered through wildflower-covered meadows, and stared at the endless stretch of snow-capped peaks. I had no worries anymore, no battles to fight, and no more sleepless nights spent agonizing over things I couldn't change. For the first time in years, I had been sleeping soundly, undisturbed by the weight of responsibilities I no longer had to carry. For the first time, I picked up a camera, not to record meals or schedules or anything else for anyone else, but just to preserve these moments, to remember the moment. I sat by a quiet lake for an entire afternoon, saying nothing but simply breathing in the fresh mountain air, blue skies, rolling hills, a gentle breeze, and the sound of the stream. How had I never experienced this before, and why had I spent the last 30 years living like a prisoner trapped in a kitchen, shaken by duty? Not long after Samuel finally signed the divorce papers, our last conversation was about Harper's bright, carefree laughter in the sun. His voice was cold at the end of the call, and he spat out, "Amelia, you're being impulsive, one day you'll regret this." I laughed quietly and didn't bother to respond, but half a month later, I finally understood what he meant by regret, and the internet went crazy. One brave fan even asked Samuel directly, "What's your relationship with Autumn?" And Samuel just smiled, neither confirming nor denying, but Autumn shared a photo of them holding hands on her own account with the caption, "Grateful for the way time carves our lives." Samuel's longtime fans flooded social media with images of him and Autumn together, standing close, seemingly lost in their own world, their body language intimate. Samuel and Autumn were meant to be. Amelia, who Samuel never even made his marriage public to, was the one who was never the one I read the comments about, but I felt nothing. The internet went crazy, but now this is true love after 40 years, and they finally found their way back to each other in a romance that lasts a lifetime. The same Samuel who once couldn't even fry an egg was now standing in a kitchen meticulously preparing a meal full of love just for her on her birthday. I laughed quietly, turned off my phone, and kept washing the fresh blueberries in my basket, but it wasn't the photos of Jack that really chilled me. He had flown back for Autumn's birthday celebration. And he sent me a message on his way home, saying, "Mom, you're the one who decided to leave this marriage. Dad and Autumn are just pursuing their happiness. Don't go causing trouble for them later. You're too old to be getting a divorce. Aren't you afraid of becoming a joke?" I stared at the screen with a sense of cold indifference. This is how the world operates. When a man makes a decision, it's seen as pursuing happiness, but when a woman reaches a certain age, she is expected to. I was no longer that woman, so I turned off my phone, picked up my basket, and continued washing the blueberries Harper and I had gathered today across the kitchen. Harper's face was flushed with rage. "Mom. She is told she can't pursue anything anymore and should just endure without complaining or resisting." Still, I was no longer that woman. One of the best things about getting to this age is that I can finally see everything clearly. I had taken too many wrong turns, endured too much pain, and swallowed too much humiliation, and I wasn't going to waste any more time or energy on people who didn't deserve my attention. You should come clean and tell the world that you were hidden for 30 years. Were not worth it, since I now realized that the rest of my life was intended for something much bigger. Following the divorce, I received a sizable sum of money. Samuel had always been frugal and had a tight hold on our finances over the years, and I had virtually no personal savings. Every penny went toward running the household. This time, however, he was forced to give me what was rightfully mine. Because I had always lived simply and couldn't afford to spend it. After spending all that money on myself, I decided to donate a portion of it to an elementary school in a low-income neighborhood so that the kids would have better access to educational resources. Harper was totally on board when she learned about it, so we drove to the community school, a small establishment in a quiet town. The buildings were old, but my heart clenched when we entered a classroom where a group of kids were huddled around a dilapidated wooden table sharing a single book as they worked on their assignments. Their eyes were as focused as that book. The paint on the rooftops was peeling off, some of the windows had cracks in the glass, and the bulletin board at the entrance was covered with handwritten fundraising notices. They were short on funds and couldn't even afford the newest textbooks. Was their doorway to the world. I greeted them with a warm smile, and the kids paused for a moment before beaming. "Hello, ma'am." The principal, a kind elderly woman, shook my hand several times when she learned about the donation. "You have no idea what this means for our kids. We can use the money to refurbish the reading room, buy new books, and even offer more after-school tutoring." I nodded and grinned. Later that afternoon, at a small community gathering, I told them stories about the world outside of their small town and that their future should never be determined by their circumstances, background, or even marriage. A shy young girl raised her hand and gently asked Amelia, "How do you know if you're living a life that has value?" I looked at her, and my voice as I stepped off the small stage, I looked around me, my smile growing as I realized that, despite being close to 60, I still have the freedom to choose my own path and do the things that matter. Their eyes shone with understanding. Gentle yet firm, you learn, you grow, you make yourself strong, and through your own efforts you shape your life into what you want it to be. Though the fairy tale romance between Samuel and Autumn was beginning to fall apart, they had planned to get married in 3 months, thinking they were writing the ideal ending to their late-life love story. At first, they reveled in the nostalgia, convinced they had recaptured their love, and in that warm, sunlit library, among those eager young faces, I saw inspiration and hope quietly taking root. Their youth, but once they moved in together, little arguments started to appear and spread like cracks in a wall until they were unavoidable. Autumn refused to cook, so they kept a housekeeper. Samuel was allergic to cat hair, but Autumn insisted on keeping her cat, and no matter how much he tried to convince her to give it up, she refused. He told himself that love was about their housekeeper called in for a week off, and Samuel came home exhausted from a long day to find the kitchen cold and untouched, the dining table bare, not even a bowl of fruit, and Autumn sitting on the couch, sipping her tea. Samuel scowled. This was a compromise about accepting the small habits that made a person who they were, but small habits have a way of turning into big problems. Samuel took a deep breath, frustration beginning to seep into his voice, saying, "Susan's not here. Couldn't you at least try to cook something?" Autumn didn't even look up why I would do that, and restaurants exist for a reason. "I'm already dealing with enough, I don't need to come home and worry about this too," Samuel said, setting down her teacup before finally looking him in the eye. When she said coolly, "I am not your maid," the room fell silent, and Samuel realized for the first time that he had been taking things for granted for 30 years. He had never had to worry about laundry, meals, appointments, or organizing his daily life. I had been the one doing everything except for the woman standing in. Samuel had thought that his life went smoothly because that was just the way things were, but now he realized that his smooth life had only existed because I had been the one to smooth out all the rough edges. There was no going back on what had already been done. In front of him, it wasn't me, Autumn wasn't Amelia, and she wasn't going to take care of him or devote 30 years of her life to making his life easier. When the internet first started to take off, nobody knew about Samuel's 30-year covert marriage or the fact that he had been involved with Autumn even while we were still together. She had given him everything without hesitation and committed herself to making his life smooth, but he had been the one to push her away. She had entered a world that was much larger than his and was leading a life all her own. However, secrets never remain hidden. Some astute users discovered clues on Jack's social media and pieced together the timeline, uncovering the whole truth. Samuel had concealed his marriage for 30 years, allowing his wife to give up everything in silence to stand on stage and accept flowers from his ex-girlfriend before quickly divorcing and rekindling their tragic romance. The news went viral overnight, and the very people who had once supported Samuel and Autumn's love story, but in an instant, they turned against him. This man has no conscience. After 30 years of marriage in the dark, he is holding hands with his ex, who won't be angry because he left the wife who supported him through everything. He then had the gall to act like a loyal lover, which is a joke. Samuel's career took a huge hit, and his plays were abruptly cancelled or rescheduled. Loyal fans were no longer waiting at the stage door, and for the first time, Samuel's face showed signs of exhaustion. Late one evening, my phone rang, and I looked at the screen. It had been months since the divorce, and Samuel had never called me before. I hesitated, then answered, and his voice was low and exhausted. He took a deep breath and said, "I promise I'll be better this time. I won't make you angry anymore." His words were sincere, but my heart had long since stopped responding to him. Once I thought a husband was a woman's property. His words were filled with a remorse I had never heard before Amelia returned. "Let's get remarried." I was outside in the courtyard helping Harper hang the freshly laundered white bed linens when Samuel and Jack arrived at Harper's a week later. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was mistaken. Jack hesitated for a second before saying, "Mom, we were wrong," and then he said, "Dad and I have come to take you home. Will you come back with us?" I looked up past Jack. I smiled faintly and said, "Jack, go back. Didn't you and your father just come back from somewhere? What about your studies?" Jack quickly shook his head, his voice anxious. "No, Autumn and Dad broke up a while ago." Samuel was a shadow of the man he used to be. He had lost weight, his hair was streaked with gray, his posture had weakened, and his once confident presence had diminished. I heard what he had to say, but I didn't feel anything. Samuel and Autumn were over, and that was his problem, not mine. Just because he wanted to make peace with himself didn't mean I owed him my forgiveness. His regret was no longer worth even a glimmer of my feelings. "If you two make up, I'll leave right away." When the first raindrops started to fall, Harper hurried out of the house with a basket. "Mom, come inside. I'll handle the sheets." Both Jack and Samuel tensed at her words. Jack scowled and pointed at Harper, who was looking at him bewildered. "Who is this woman, and why is she calling you Mom?" Harper put the basket down without hesitation. The rain grew heavier as if the sky itself was agreeing with her. Samuel's face darkened, Jack's expression turned furious, and she said flatly, "Why are you here? My mom is doing just fine without you." They divorced with a sharp thud, planted her hands on her hips, and stood tall. "I just patted her." Harper gave her a silent signal to go inside, and then I turned to face my ex-husband and son. They were unsteady and hesitant, so I picked up a big umbrella, opened it, and held it over them to protect them from the rain. Then I said, "Go home," and Samuel's eyes and lips flickered with regret. "I've made a new life here." Closed the umbrella, turned around, and walked back inside. Harper followed me closely, her eyes following me. Jack's face was tight with frustration, unable to comprehend why the mother he once knew had become someone so unyielding. There were many things he didn't understand, and I no longer had the time or patience to explain them to appease him to wait quietly. A few days later, I received a letter from the kids at the school where I had donated. They wrote it by hand, and although their handwriting was crooked and immature, it was full of sincerity. They told me that the library finally had new books and study materials every day as a result of my donation, and they couldn't wait to rush in there to read more stories and gain more knowledge. I put the letter gently on the table, my eyes welling up. Next to me were the white sheets Harper and I had hung out to dry, fresh and pure, releasing a faint fresh scent in the sunlight. I knew that my life had turned a new page and that Samuel's story was no longer a part of mine at that very moment. "Thank you, Amelia. We will work hard in school and become useful people in the future. We will never forget your kindness." Shortly after returning from Colorado, Samuel became ill and collapsed due to prolonged exhaustion and mental stress. Jack had to return to school and was unable to care for him, so he had to hire a professional caregiver. Although she knew Samuel was ill, she never paid him a visit and instead continued to attend social events and post pictures of him. Samuel had been at the top of his game for decades, but now he was alone in his sickbed. Perhaps he had finally realized that he would never find someone like me again, someone who had been willing to go with him without conditions for so many years. On the day I happened to return to the city for a meeting with the chair of the organization leader, I had heard that she was still looking glamorous at her social media gatherings with friends. After some deliberation, I made the decision to visit Samuel in the hospital. He had lost even more weight since I had last seen him, and his face was pale. His eye sockets were sunken, and he had a look of surprise and hope in his eyes when he saw me enter the room. "You must still feel something for our marriage, right?" I silently observed him, feeling a range of emotions. Ince, who had been full of energy and confidence, now lay weakly on the bed with eyes full of anticipation and reluctance. I said softly, "Sam, I'm not here because I expect anything from you, I'm just passing by." A moment of disappointment flickered in Samuel's eyes, and he fell silent for a moment before asking in a strained voice if I hadn't been with her that day at the curtain call but was waiting for you on from 25 to 60, my life revolved around you. I gave up my career, gave up my dreams, and dedicated myself fully to taking care of you and the kids. But did you ever make the same sacrifices for me? You're always like this, only appreciating the value of something once it's gone. Stage, would we have ended up like this? I smiled gently, shaking my head. Sam. Sam's eyes were full of reluctance as I stood up to leave, but he tried to stop me. "Amelia, will you come see me again?" I smiled softly, and my tone calmed Samuel. Unfortunately, life doesn't give second chances, and that question has no answer. The years I had sacrificed couldn't be undone. Directions: "I'll wish you well, but I won't be returning." That was the last time we saw each other. Years later, I didn't hear anything about Samuel until 5 years after we had parted ways. His fans on social media had made him the talk of the town, providing me with updates on his life. He had been silent for 5 years due to illness, but he had now returned to the spotlight as a theater director, and his play was about a woman's story who had sacrificed everything for her family, who had been caught up in the everyday details of life, but who ultimately discovered her own value and decided to live her true self by choosing freedom. This story was so familiar to me that it made me smile ironically. Without a doubt, I was the play's inspiration. On the first night of his play, Samuel stood on stage and publicly thanked everyone. His eyes were, he said, "I want to thank someone who quietly sacrificed for decades in my life when I was at my lowest. She came to my side, gave up her bright future, and took care of the household and the kids so that I could focus on my career without worrying. This work is a reflection of the past and a hope for the future." It was complex, full of both emotion and regret. I sat at home quietly watching the scene on my phone screen, and then I remembered a phone call from Jack years ago, saying, "Mom, Dad wants to make a movie, and the inspiration comes from you. He wants your approval. At the time, I was busy working with a charity organization to set up a children's reading corner in a school that was solely focused on building a better learning environment for the kids, so I said nonchalantly, let him do it, and then I forgot all about it. This long-forgotten detail didn't come back to me until today, when I saw Samuel on the first night of his play. Harper took my hand and smiled, Mom, you're the leading lady in that play. I laughed quietly, not saying anything about it, and I was 60 years old. On the screen, Samuel's figure gradually faded as he left the stage, but as soon as I realized that my life was full of limitless possibilities and value rather than just endless household chores, I had to thank him for making me feel younger than I had 5 years prior. My silver hair was styled in a chic bun, and I felt alive every time I looked in the mirror. Mom, aren't you going to watch it through to the end? Harper looked at me in shock as the screen on my phone faded to black. I gave her a small smile and went to the window to look at the deep blue sky. There was no need to do that, I had already seen what I needed to see. Harper came over and stood next to me, so what's next for you? I turned to face her, and I had a playful glint in my eyes as I considered learning how to paint Harper's eyes. Sounds like a fantastic idea, Harper said, grinning and nodding. I've always wanted to try, but I've always been too busy. Now that I think it's time, I'll be a few days after I waited to see your masterpiece. I signed up for a painting class at a tiny neighborhood art studio and I entered the school on the first day feeling both anxious and excited because the teacher was a young artist. He regarded me with a trace of astonishment, and I smiled back at him. Welcome, ma'am. Class, I took the brush, dipped it in paint, and started applying it to the canvas slowly. At first, my hand shook a little, but as time went on, I lost myself in the world of lines and colors, and I forgot everything at once. On the final day of the course, I painted a picture of everything from the past and lost myself in the freedom of the present. Sunflower. In bloom, its petals barely open as it came to life on the canvas. The teacher came over and looked at my picture with approval, even though it was growing toward the sun. Work is vibrant, much like the energy you give me. After I finished painting, I gathered my materials and as I walked out of the studio, the sunlight warmed my hair, making me feel lighter and more fulfilled than I had ever felt. I had already begun planning my next trip destination before I even stepped down the street. I believe I want to depict the endless ocean and the free-flying birds on the beach. Everything appeared so full. Enormous potential since there are countless options in life.